Good evening and welcome to the United Center. We're on the floor of the Democratic National Convention on night 4. There is excitement in this room, and there will not be an empty seat. All this a culmination of an extraordinary chapter in our political history after a summer of upheaval. Vice President Kamala Harris takes the stage and officially accepts the Democratic nomination to be president. She'll address the party's convention on its final night here in Chicago, laying out her upbeat vision for the next 4 years and painting a striking contrast with Donald Trump's view of the country. Trump taking his campaign to the southern border today as he continues to attack Harris on immigration, a key issue as the race for the White House moves into its final chapter. All of it coming just over a month after President Biden ended his re-election campaign and endorsed Harris as his replacement. Peter Alexander starts us off tonight here in Chicago.
You only get one chance to sell yourself to the people you want to work for, and for Kamala Harris, tonight's the night. The first black woman and South Asian American to accept the nomination of a major party ticket.
Let us always remember, when we fight, we win.
Campaign sources tell NBC News tonight she'll focus on joy, optimism, and patriotism, sharing her personal story, the daughter of a middle-class mom, detailing the contrast between her vision, a new way forward, she calls it, and former President Trump's, and committing to be a president for all Americans. The speech will cap off a stunning 2 months. Harris, who never won a primary or caucus vote, instead was propelled to the nomination after President Biden dropped out.
Joe, thank you for your historic leadership. We are forever grateful to you.
Now enjoying a burst of Democratic momentum, but also facing key challenges. She's the sitting vice president at a time when 80% of Americans are dissatisfied with the direction of the country. And polls show voters give Mr. Trump the edge on top issues like the economy and immigration. Last night, her new running mate, Tim Walz, a former teacher and high school football coach, giving a pep talk.
We've got the ball. We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
Introducing himself and his family to America.
Hope, Gus, and Gwen, you are my entire world, and I love you.
His 17-year-old son, Gus, in tears, shouting, "That's my dad." Later, Walz calling out Mr. Trump and his VP pick, J.D. Vance.
Leaders don't spend all day insulting people and blaming others. Leaders do the work. So I don't know about you, I'm ready to turn the page on these guys. So go ahead, say it with me. We're not going back.
Former President Clinton accusing Mr. Trump of being obsessed with himself.
So the next time you hear him, don't count the lies. Count the eyes.
And Oprah Winfrey electrifying Democrats, her first ever appearance at a convention.
We are beyond ridiculous tweets and lies and foolery. These are complicated times, people, and they require adult conversation.
Urging Americans, regardless of their party, to back the Democratic nominee.
We're all Americans, and together, let's all choose Kamala Harris.
And Peter, viewers at home are likely to notice something out of the audience tonight. What is it?
Lester, it's going to be impossible to miss. Many delegates are wearing white tonight in support of the women's suffrage movement, a nod to the history that Vice President Harris could make if she wins, becoming the nation's first woman president. Lester?
Peter Alexander, thank you. And now to Arizona and the manhunt for a suspect who also threatened to kill former President Trump. This comes as a Republican nominee campaigned at the border. Garrett Haake spoke with Mr. Trump.
Lester, the former president holding that campaign event at the border here today in the midst of a manhunt. We've learned late tonight that suspect has now been arrested. All of this as I pressed the former president about his immigration plans and how he'd pay for them. Tonight, former President Trump holding an event in the shadow of the Arizona border wall. As the sheriff here announced, there's a manhunt for a suspect wanted on unrelated warrants who also threatened to kill a presidential candidate. Multiple law enforcement sources tell NBC News it's Trump. The former president saying he wasn't told about the threat.
And I have great respect for Secret Service.
Trump is in the midst of a battleground blitz, with sources telling NBC News Robert Kennedy Jr. is planning to endorse him tomorrow, though talks are still ongoing. We've been reporting that RFK Jr. is getting ready to endorse you. What role would he have either with your campaign or in your administration?
Well, I don't want to get too much into it because you're telling me something I don't know, other than I've always been friendly with him. If he were going to endorse me, I would consider it a great honor.
That's despite all the things he said about vaccine, 9/11 conspiracies. Does that reflect on you if you put him in your administration?
No, it doesn't mean administration, but certainly having his endorsement, because things that he agrees on, I also agree on. You know, there are many things that are perhaps the opposite of what you're saying, but he's a respected guy.
And we asked about the Democratic convention. What do you make of the attacks against you last night?
Well, that's all they have, because they're failed. They failed on the border, as you can see. They failed on the economy. They failed on jobs.
Today, Trump going after Vice President Harris on border security.
She wants to have an open border.
But we pressed him on his plan for mass deportation. He offered no plan to pay for it. It's going to cost billions of dollars. Where will that money come from?
Well, it'll cost trillions of dollars to keep these people, and I'm talking about in particular starting with the criminals.
Earlier, we spoke to an undocumented immigrant from Mexico who came here 20 years ago and has 2 children who are American citizens. I don't think that people can possibly understand what it feels like to live with that fear of deportation, she told us. If you're trying to deport millions of people, that would perhaps include mixed families. Will you separate families to get to those goals?
Provisions will be made, but we have to get the criminals out. We have murderers in our country. They just walk in. We have over 20 million people, in my opinion, over 20 million people came in, and the number is growing every single day.
Mr. Trump returns to Arizona tomorrow for another event. RFK Jr. will be here too earlier in the day. It's all increasing the speculation that the two could appear perhaps at a joint endorsement event. Finally, Mr. Trump will end the week in Las Vegas for one final stop on what has been a multi-state battleground blitz, counter-programming the DNC. Lester?
All right, Garrett, Haake, thanks very much. I'm joined here by Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker and senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson. Kristen, we would always say this is a major night for the candidate, but in this case, you've got that compressed timeline.
Absolutely. This is a big night. One of the things we'll be watching for, does Vice President Kamala Harris clearly explain how a Harris administration would differ from a Biden administration? So far, she's released very few policy details, hasn't done any interviews. We'll also be listening to her tone. Democrats concerned that Biden's strategy of trying to paint Trump as a threat to the democracy hasn't resonated with voters, so we've seen more positivity. How Harris does tonight could determine whether the momentum she had coming into this week turns into a post-convention bout.
Yeah, and maybe there will be momentum, Hallie, but at the same time, this is still going to be a very tight race at the end of this week.
It's incredibly competitive right now. It is incredibly close, and there are those in the Trump orbit who believe that ultimately this race over the next 70-plus days is going to come down to issues like the economy and immigration. Keep in mind the next time after tonight that we will see these candidates in these high-profile primetime moments. It's not going to be a party. It will be a face-off when the two take the stage for their debate. Preparations have already started for both candidates. We understand the vice president has already held at least one mock session. That is going to be a big moment and a big test for these two.
All right, Hallie and Kristen, thanks to you both. Join us all evening on NBC News Now for continuing coverage. Speaking tonight, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Senator Mark Kelly, and many, many more. And join me on NBC starting at 9 p.m. Eastern for the crescendo of the convention as Kamala Harris accepts the Democratic Party's nomination. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.